Oh yeah, so hello Finland. That was cool. First of all, I would really like to give a huge applause to our organizers because they did an amazing job with this conference, right? We are very happy with it. So let's give them applause. It's for you. You did a great job. I'm looking forward for the second edition. Okay, so hi Finland once again. Today I'm going to speak about styled components, and so I have this really weird problem with accenting things. Can you do the counting? Every time I will just say components instead components. Count it and tell me it on the after party. I will drink as many shots I just did it. So let's go back to styled components. I have to be very careful right now. First of all, I want to highlight creators of this amazing library, Max Stoiber and Glenn Modern. They are really great. They're just working a lot on CSS in general when it comes to our experience as developers. When we are doing not only React, but mostly React applications. So Glenn actually is also person responsible for CSS modules, which you probably know. Please raise your hand if you ever did something with CSS modules. Oh yeah, it's a pretty big amount of people. And what about styled components? Okay, that's cool. I'm very happy. But what is the point of this whole speech? You are probably familiar with the very romantic term, which I love, which we nerds love to use, which is, you are the CSS to my HTML. Oh, damn it. Sorry. So what I want you to take away from this speech is turning this into, you are my styled component actually, you are a styled component to my React. And OK, but who is this girl? Why actually I should listen to her? So yeah, this is me on the horse. I'm not using a GoPro. Sorry for the quality. It's pretty bad. But I really love this. And this is what I do mostly in my free time. I'm Kasia. This is my Twitter handle, of course. I'm working for Twill, and Twill is actually a pretty interesting project of Marsk Group, and you, as Finnish people, probably know this company. They're responsible for shipping stuff from China, in Asia in general, to Europe and US, so they're pretty huge. And what they want to do is create a product for this very complicated process of getting a container stuff from Asia to Europe or US, or reverse the whole process. I'm front-end developer. I do it for a living, also as a hobby, and for a very long time, and that's it. Oh, and then the movie just finished, so we can move further. OK. Styled components are dope. And this is actually Sarah Vera word. Thank you, Sarah, for this. But before we go there, I would like you to ask yourselves a question. So, do I really need this weird CSS-in-JS to have a successful project? Do I really need this? It's kind of a new buzzword in our community. There are people, living in Twitter bubble who are observing many fantastic people like Yanni, for example, or Ken, or Sia. And those people are talking, oh, yeah, the GraphQL is like the next big thing, then Apollo, then what's more, render props lately, right? And one of those things are styled components. So, well, do I really need this? Hell no. Hell no. Like, CSS is a very powerful language. It's a beautiful language. It works. It just works. And there are plenty of options to use CSS in your React application. So there is like a pure, plain CSS just applied to your application. There are many preprocessors like SAS or post-CSS or less. Of course, you can improve. You can even like use some architecture in your CSS with BEM, so have more organized CSS code. I know that it's possible. There are some people who did it. And of course, you can use CSS modules, which are still a valid solution for CSS in React applications. So why even bother? Well, that's the question I asked myself when I was preparing this whole speech, because actually, there are some advantages of using styled components. Yeah, that's +1. OK, so the simplicity. So as Yanni said, let's keep it simple. Let's close our CSS, JavaScript, and HTML in one component. And then let's just use the power of JavaScript inside, because with styled components, you can actually just fire any JavaScript you can imagine. You have access to properties, you can have access to state of component. You can do whatever you want. And it comes with the API made by really awesome guys from this little library. So there is like much more than just using JavaScript by yourself. Of course, what I'm going to talk about, there is SSR, which is also pretty neat and sometimes important when it comes to using CSS-in-JS, because CSS itself is pretty, there is no need for SSR, but when it comes to styled components, can be like problematic to have it without JavaScript enabled in our browsers. So, and the theming, of course, this is what I will also try to include into my speech, because in my opinion, themes are very good for your applications, and not only for changing colors or font sizes, like for different users, but also for accessibility. And this is another big thing in React applications. This is what we really need to improve in developer mindset. OK, but there is a disclaimer. I'm sorry, but you still need to know CSS. There's no way out. So CSS-in-JS is actually no inline styles. This is not a generated CSS into your components. So, sorry. And this is still good old CSS, and you still have to know it to avoid this awful thing, which by some really weird accident landed in the CSS world, because importer never will fix your bad code. This is not going to happen. And this thing usually comes when we import like huge bootstrap CSS into our application. Then comes the time when a developer just starts thinking, OK, I really like this library. I'm using it. But there is this awful designer who just decided that this thingy, this one little thingy in there has to be purple. And what we do, we use important for that. And that just said. So raise your hand, whoever used important. Yeah, this is this is just sad. I'm so disappointed. OK. So there are a few CSS-related concerns when it comes to actually decided if we want styled components or not. And one of them is global versus local. What is this? So for me, global is actually how we see access to this code. Where is this code accessible? How it actually, what is the impact of this code to our application? So as you probably know, CSS is just global by default. So even if we want to color just one thing, and I don't really like pink, but I use it to show you. So if you just want to color only one thing, shit can happen. And with style components, it's pretty different, because everything is local by default. So this is the difference. This is a huge difference. You have to actually define styles for really small pieces of your code. So here is, once again, we keep the Yanni's rule. So we are building a really small parts of the code, and then we are reusing them over all over our application. And we just simply import the components, the styled components, into our application. So what actually happens under the hood with this code? Because some of you probably think that, oh, well, this is another inline styles library, so there is like a lot of a lot of CSS generated into HTML. It probably looks like horrible, but what actually happens is CSS is magically generated into our HTML head, and it looks just fine because the power of classes is used here. But what if I want global styles? So it's still possible, because styled components gives us opportunity to just inject global CSS into our head. So it's still possible. So let's go further. Another concern when it comes to CSS is how we reuse it. And with the pure plain CSS, it's pretty simple. And it's pretty simple. But I just forgot about a few slides, so let's go. What drives development? What drives development? What do you think? What drives us as developers? Well, it's, of course, money and business. So we are simple people who take some money and produce code. So there is a guy who is our manager by some accident. I don't know how he landed there. And what he wants a cotton sweater component. A cut in a sweater. OK, you think, why does he even need that? But whatever, let's do this. Here you go. Here's your cut in sweater. So then manager approaches us and sees it and just say, OK, I really like it. Actually, I liked it so much. Please create me dog in sweater. And maybe let's make the dog having a hat. So OK, so we are just, whatever, dude, let's do the dog in a hat. But then, what's usually happen is that your designer team or other manager approaches you and say, OK, I really like the dog, the cat, whatever you have there. I've seen that your job is pretty quick, so please create us hamster and a snail in sweaters. So at this point, or maybe if you are a good developer even earlier, you start thinking, OK, I repeat myself very often. And this is mostly business fault, because they have no requirements at all written at the very beginning. But still, you see the pattern, and you really want to reuse your code. So this is what you do. And as I said, it's by default with CSS with the power of classes. So I've prepared a really simple example of an underline class, because I'm a huge fan of one class doing one thing and then just combining this pattern. And this is what we do with Ben, usually by, of course, adding some modifiers and components names. But still, what we have here is pretty simple paragraph, which will be big-sized and underlined. And it's there. It's global. It's actually accessible from everywhere. We are done, right? So what can be wrong? What can go wrong here? Have you ever heard about specificity? Please? I will ask a lot of questions, sorry. This is who I am. Yeah. So the specificity problem is a pretty huge problem when it comes to CSS. Because sometimes our CSS, our browser, will just count how important given rule in CSS is. And it's defined by the cascade, so how CSS works, which means that something below is more important than something which was made before. But it also means that there are some rules, some pseudo-selectors, some classes, IDs, and stuff like that, which can complicate our code, even if we think that something below is more important. So here is a simple example of how you can actually complicate code for your friends, CSS code, of course. What I did here, I just used a pretty simple selector for a sibling for our next paragraph, which will be overridden by the default code. Default rule will be overridden here. But let's go further. So if we just create our paragraph with the class names defined like here, we're pretty sure what will be the result. But as you can imagine, what will be the result of this one? Oh yeah, it's more fucked up. And oh yeah, I just don't know what happened. This is actually because we know what happened because we just used really simple example. But sometimes we have this huge CSS file which is pretty big, and we are very lazy as developers, so we don't want to go through all this CSS. We'll rewrite. I mean, we just write another rule which will override those rules, and this is how you actually create monsters. But still, this is a very common problem, and this is what goes wrong pretty often with CSS. So how it works, how we can actually do this with styled components, and as you probably can imagine, styles in styled components are just reused as we reuse components, and it's that simple. So if we have paragraph, which is actually a component, and if we want to add some extra styles to this component, we just extend it. We just extend it by the styled, which is actually a library API, by adding extra styles. And that's it. This is that simple. Of course, we can even apply the tag or component, whichever we want. So if we have paragraph styles, but for some reason we want to use div or span or another HTML tag, we can still use it, and we can still do this. So what about those weird selectors and the specificity problem? Is this solved by styled components? Well, the sad news here is that shit still can happen. I mean, it's still our good old CSS. So if we are not doing it properly by how we should try to keep it simple and reuse components and just trying to keep just one single thing for one single component, like one role, then it still can happen. But we are more aware of that. So let's go further. Let's go to the theming, because theming is pretty cool. It was done pretty cool by styled components. And what are the themes in general? What do you think? It's well, I will just answer my question. So this is mostly just keeping some style variables. Like it can be colors, can be font size, could be like wherever you want to keep there. And it's still possible with Sass or less, because you just keep some variables which you reuse over your Sass code. But the problem here can be to access those variables, those theme variables through your components in your JavaScript, actually, to inject them somehow. So in start components, actually, the power of CSS and JavaScript is unleashed by React. And I really love this GIF. Let's give it like proper moment. OK, so actually our theme provider, which we import from the start components library, is using context API. So we have a provider, which we apply a JSON or a JavaScript, which keeps some theme variables. And then given theme is just passed through the whole application. And how the JSON can look. So my JSON looks pretty simple. So I have some colors defined, and that's totally it. And I just apply them to my theme provider, and then every single start component is a customer for this theme, which is actually accessible by props, as you can see in the example. So with this powerful tool, I would like you to think about accessibility. Sorry. Oh, and I have demo. I have demo for that because I actually sat down for a while and thought about what will be like a very good example for showing you how we can improve our applications with themes. And a little disclaimer is I'm a huge fan of Sean Bean, and it happens that he dies a lot. But I still love him. So I decided to create an app which keeps all his deaths, a list of all his deaths inside. And let's go to this application. So yeah. I'll just make sure it's working. Oh, where's my screen sharing? Here we are. I have probably a lot of stuff open, which is weird. But this is my application, which is hopefully working, yeah. It's pretty simple, looks simple. And let's go to the code, because it's more interesting. Oh, no. Should be bigger. Should be much more bigger. This size. OK. So what I have application, which actually used time-based theme, which is it's visible from the end of a little bit. OK, let's make it bigger. Bigger. So what I have here, I have time-based theme, which is my custom theme, which does extra stuff besides just passing some theme. And what's in there is actually our theme provider, which is imported from start components. And then I'm using also polished library, which is a pack of really useful methods for combining colors and actually work with CSS. I'm also importing my theme from JSON, and then what I do, I have few themes defined here. So first of all, I keep them in data, yeah. And I have purple rivers, I have red scarlet and seafoam. That's just weird names for this, but yeah, this is. So let's try another theme which will be provided to our application. And here this is like this simple, so we just provide some another variables and it works. But what is more fun in this implementation, and let's go back to the purple rivers because this is my, I'm the biggest fan of this theme. And what's more, I'm just trying to make my application more accessible to users who use this application in a different part of the day. So as you can imagine, this is what Twitter does. So if we use our application during night, Twitter provides us a dark theme of application, which you can use to have like smaller luminance, so your eyes just doesn't hurt that much. And this is what I tried to do in my theme provider. So when I actually mount my provider component, I get the time, or like the current time in here. And based on this time, I calculate grade, which should be, it's pretty simple. It's like, my implementation here is like very, very dummy, but you can do better. I will open source this code, so if you have any idea how to make it better, feel invited. So at my implementation, if hour is like bigger than 4 p.m., I'm starting calculating how to make it more accessible to users who use it when it's dark. And I will try to just override the time for you to show you how it works when it's night. So yeah, it just got darker. Let's try to have it like lighter. So at 10, our application looks light, maybe not that light, but when it just gets dark, it's starting getting darker. And this is just simple implementation, simple example, but you can actually do it better and think about accessibility with this. And this is what I want to, of course, do as well. Where is my... OK, let's go back to the settings. Oh, I haven't said where I'm from. I'm from Poland. We share the same sea, right? But you have like the better part, like the cleaner one. OK. So what's more? What's next? SSR. And what should I care actually about server-side rendering? Because of few things. First of all, user experience. And this one is pretty important. No one wants to wait for your application. No one wants to actually sit there and look on your really dirty application, just somehow loading CSS just a few seconds after the application was loaded. And this is pretty awful. So this is the first example of how SSR would improve your application. Another is, of course, performance. And here, what I mean by performance is actually if we fire our React application on the server side and then give user like the first shot of the application, it's probably very connected to the user experience, because you just get your application faster, and the CSS is calculated, it's already there. So you have like zero difference when it comes to comparing styled components and pure CSS. And last but not least, CEO. So as you probably know, React application, it's getting better and better when it comes to indexing React applications by Google. Actually, the search engines are already supporting JavaScript, so we are going somewhere in this, but still, if you are considered CEO, I would strongly recommend you to use SSR. And by example, I also would like to show you the critical render path based on my pretty small application when it comes to styled components and server-side rendering. So as you can see, my application, it took like 3.9 milliseconds to load my application, like the first patch of loading, but it appeared after, I don't know, over 400 milliseconds, which is not that bad, but this is just small example app. And now, what happened after I applied some SSR? Well, it just gained like 100. Oh, but sorry, it just appeared right away, right? So we had some results right away, like from the very beginning. So this is what happened and how it was done. So I've done this beautiful application with help of Next.js. And by a beautiful accident, Sia will be talking about Next.js during next talk. But I have just a small portion of the code which I used to do this. So inside the pages which Next.js uses to actually render you some parts of the code based on the URL route, I prepare special document JavaScript file which applies server style sheet from styled components. And as you can see, it's pretty simple. So what I do, I just get the instance of server style sheet, then I'm rendering the page, which is actually our page which we are trying to get when we hit the given URL. And I'm collecting all the styles. And this is done by styled components library, actually. And what I do, in the end, I just pass these style tags as props to my render method, and then apply them to the head. So this is probably the same which is happening in the normal styled components library, and that's probably it. Of course, I have demo for that as well. So let's go ahead. Let's do this. Let's take a look. So it's pretty the same app. What I just did is that I created index, which is on my root page in the Next.js. In the root.js, in the root URL. Sorry for that. And then I imported my components into this page and exported it as my main page. What happened? What is happening actually, which is where the whole server-side styles generating is happening is a document.js, which is some. This is actually a JS file which is imported by any page inside this directory. And what is there is, as I showed you before, is just preparing some initial props. And besides any other props, it's preparing the server style sheets based on your styled components CSS, and simply pass it to the HTML. And it works. It just works. And I'm not only trying to convince you by promise. I will show you. I'm sorry. So this is pretty the same app. which is server-side rendered. Of course, this is pretty small, so you don't see the difference, but let's disable CSS. Yeah, there is no JavaScript. Let's disable JavaScript, not CSS. Who would do that? And it simply works, right? And it's blazing fast. OK, I will open source that. I will open source this as well after the presentation. But for now, let's just do this. OK. Let's go to takeaways. So what should you take away besides using styled components to beautify your React code? It's still good old CSS. This is still the same. It's just how you write it, what's different. It helps you organize your code, because it's more React style of doing things, and this is what is awesome. It helps you with theming your JS, your app, and of course, the capital letters, accessibility. I would really like you to think about it, to start thinking about it, and of course, have fun with your code. And by the way, every tool is a good tool. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.